And welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Daren Jaime. Today, we thank you for joining us. Now, if you're asking the question, what is this show all about? Well, we bring you a forum discussing and providing deeper understanding on the issues and inequities that so many people face, from systemic inequalities to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected to us as the Social Justice Forums begins now. And welcome back. 350 NYC's a grassroots network that's dedicated to addressing the urgent challenge of climate change and averting a climate catastrophe. By actively engaging with communities, policymakers, and other stakeholders, the organization works to raise awareness about the climate crisis, advocate for transformative solutions, and champion the cause of environmental justice. Joining me now to discuss more is the steering committee member of 350 NYC, Mark Dunlea. And Mark, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you very much for having us on. We appreciate that.
Thank you, and we're glad to have you. And a very important conversation to have. And when we look at the state of our climate right now, and particularly as we take a look at New York City, how would you assess things?
Pretty bad, unfortunately. And the Secretary General of the United Nations keeps on making that point that the world's governments, including New York City and New York State, are not moving fast enough to avoid climate collapse. What we did in Paris, I think 7, 8 years ago, was set a target of trying to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade. We actually passed that target in the last month. It goes up and down, but they do expect to sort of permanently, we will hit that target within the next 4 to 5 years. And, you know, what we're seeing that is in extreme weather. Most recently in New York City, of course, the wildfires from Canada, caused New York City to have the worst air quality in the entire world, worse than in Delhi, India. And so we're seeing more and more extreme weather occurring, more hurricanes, more wildfires, more heat waves. And the world governments are not moving fast enough to protect people. And of course, who are the principal victims of climate change? It's the poor and people of color, certainly here in the United States, but also particularly worldwide in the developing countries.
Yeah, stay with me here on the wildfires here, because as we talk about New York City and the wildfires, a lot of us were taken aback literally by the fact that something so far away could have such a great impact right here locally. How much did these wildfires set us back?
Well, the problem is going to keep on occurring. I saw some statistic as to, how much they contributed to global warming, and it was pretty extreme. But I can't, say that particular, data point at the top of my head. However, this is the beginning of the wildfire season in Canada. So it's going to go on for most of the summer. And of course, we've seen that previously, particularly both in Australia, but also in California, where each year seems to be the worst wildfire season ever. And we actually do get some of the haze and smoke, from California here in the United States. And I just remember 4 or 5 years ago how the Swedish elections in Sweden really changed quite dramatically, because the tundra up in the Arctic Circle, which is similar to what we're seeing in Canada, was on fire. And the amount of smoke that was coming into Sweden was so extreme that it really particularly forced people to vote for Green Party candidates, but for candidates in general who want to spend more time and resources trying to deal with climate change.
Yeah. When we talk about a climate catastrophe, how do you define a climate catastrophe for the average person who may not be so familiar?
Flooding. I, like many, of course, was living in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy during Hurricane Sandy, and the type of devastation we saw, like down in the Rockaways and other places along the coast were quite shocking. And at that point, I was running an anti-hunger group, which I did for 30 years, the Hunger Action Network of New York State. And what we particularly saw was that a lot of the public housing projects down in Brooklyn lost electricity for weeks, if not months, because where do we put public housing? We put it in areas that are floodplains, that are less attractive to real estate developers. And when the waters rose, because the generators, the heating and cooling systems were on the bottom floor, they shorted out. And many of these were high rises, 15, 20 stories, and so for weeks people had no elevators. And a lot of times, of course, low income people can be senior citizens or disabled. And surprisingly, it was really the Occupy Wall Street movement who really led that relief effort. It was not the traditional nonprofits, but they went in into these housing projects and were willing to climb up to 15, 20 stories needed to deliver water and food. Heat waves. I think heat waves are actually the single largest source of death. I mean, actually, air pollution does, worldwide kill about 8 million people a year. And certainly you see, problems like asthma in the Bronx and other places where there's already also a lot of emissions from diesel and trucks. But heat waves make it more difficult to people to survive. And of course, it's expensive to operate air conditioners if you're living month to month to try to pay your bills. And not low income people don't always even have access to air conditioning. And then you worry about access to food. That storms will devastate crops, and there'll be 20-30% less food. And once again, it's the low income people who will not be able to afford the spike in prices when supply goes down, prices go up.
Yeah. I want to get an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. If you're just joining us now, we're joined by Mark Dunlea, who's the steering committee member of 350 NYC. And for someone who may not be so familiar with 350 NYC, a lot of advocacy and awareness is done. So, Mark, take it away a little bit and let our viewers know a little bit about the organization.
Well, 350 is a national group, actually started by college students and Bill McKibben 11, 12 years ago. 350 New York City was one of the first local groups that started. And the reason why we called ourselves 350 was because scientists said that in order to avoid catastrophic climate change, we need to keep the carbon in the atmosphere below 350 parts per million. Last couple of years, it's been above 420. So not 350, but 420. And, we basically are working to try to speed up the transition to renewable energy, clean renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, energy efficiency, really insulate homes, heat pumps, geothermal in the homes. But, probably most importantly, we have to stop burning fossil fuels. And we've actually done, kind of an okay, job in reducing emissions from producing electricity. We need to do a lot better job. But the two biggest sources of emissions are actually transportation, cars, trucks, and buildings, heating and cooling the buildings. And they in New York State, both account for more than 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. That we've done a lot worse on. I will say New York City a couple of years ago passed probably one of the best climate laws in the country, if not the planet, and that was Local Law 97, which basically required the largest buildings, 25,000 square feet or above, to reduce emissions. And since they count, if you're like in a condo or a co-op and there's 20, 30, 40 units, they count that as one building. I only realized this recently. It actually includes a lot of the condos and co-ops, and it actually reduces emissions. It does stop, I think 224, that new buildings, particularly residences, are not to add basically gas hookups into the building, but it also requires existing buildings, the larger buildings, to begin to reduce emissions, trying to get about a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Frankly, that's not enough, but it's a good start, and it's certainly better than most other cities, states, and countries are doing.
Yeah, talk to me about local government. Do you think they get the message pretty much when it comes to this issue of fossil fuel and really dealing with the environment? Are we really doing a better job, I should say?
We are doing a better job, but as the head of the United Nations is saying, we're not moving anywhere fast enough. And I will say one of the things that particularly 350 NYC did was to lead the campaign both at the New York City and then at the New York State level, and we were successful to get the public pension funds to divest from fossil fuels. More recently, not only 350 NYC, but a lot of the other climate groups have begun to focus on who is actually financing these fossil fuel companies. Even after Paris, the four big banks in New York City and the United States, in terms of financing fossil fuels, are Wells Fargo's, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Citibank. They've actually increased significantly the amount of capital investment in fossil fuel plants since the Paris Climate Accords. That is immoral. That is wrong. And so there's a major effort that groups are, saying to these banks, you have to stop that. You cannot be continuing to finance the destruction of the planet, and you need to really, begin to finance more, things like wind and solar, geothermal, battery storage.
Talk to me about some of the work that's being done legislatively. We wanted to talk a little bit about the new improved bottle bill and also the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Act.
Well, the bottle bill is 40 years old. I think 41. I was actually involved. I was one of the co-founders of NYPIRG back in 1973, New York Public Interest Research Group. We were, times have changed. A nickel back in 40 years ago, not worth as much as a nickel is today. So we were trying to get the state legislators to increase the bottle deposit to 10 cents, as other states have done. And also, sort of strangely, that the bottle bill never actually was based on the bottle itself, but rather what was in the bottle. So we started off with carbonated beverages, beer and soda. A couple of years ago, we were able to add on water, which is much bigger being sold in bottles than it were 40 years ago. But we also like to get it into liquor and wine and tea. Certainly the bottle bill has been the single most effective program in reducing waste. But that comes to the second bill. Some people know it as extended producer responsibility. But plastics have exploded across the planet in the last decades. And literally any place you go on the planet now, top of the mountains, you will find plastics there. And I was actually active in New York City, and we got New York City and then New York State to ban plastic bags. I will say it's not very well enforced in New York City as compared to the rest of the state. But we want to, within the next 10, 12 years, actually reduce the amount of single-use packaging. Amazon and other companies are doing by about 50%. And we also want to remove a lot of the very hazardous materials that are often put into the packaging, like formaldehyde. That bill did not pass, and it's sort of like a trifecta. What increasingly plastics is doing is being driven by the fossil fuel industry. As the world is saying, you have to stop burning fossil fuels. Increasingly, the fossil fuel industry is turning into making plastic out of fossil fuels. So you're going up against, the packaging industry. You're going against the fossil fuel industry. You're going up against Amazon, Coke, and it's very difficult. And I will say, since you're in the Bronx, I've been doing this for 50 years. In that 50 years, by far the single worst Assembly Speaker, particularly on environment, has been Carl Hastie, who's from the Bronx. And people need a lot of fire under Speaker Hastie. He's the head of the state assembly. He doesn't really listen very much to his members. Rank and file assembly members often aren't even allowed to talk to him. They got to go talk to his 25, 30-year-old staff, and a lot of them are very upset. And he's blocking a lot of important legislation. We saw the New York Heat Act pass the Senate this year, which would require banks to stop require utility companies to stop subsidizing the expansion of like putting in new gas lines and stuff like that. They also, the Senate passed the Climate Superfund Act, which would require the 30 largest polluters in the state emission wise, many of them multinational oil companies, to actually pay about $3 billion a year to help deal with the need to remedy climate. He won't even allow the bills to come up for a vote. Last year, he did block the public power movement. He wouldn't allow the proposal to have the New York Power Authority to build more wind and solar to come up for a vote. This year, Governor Hochul did put it in the budget, and we were able to get a compromise, not as great as we want, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. But he also wouldn't allow the packaging bill to come up, the bottle bill to come up. We need people in the Bronx to be paying a whole lot more attention to what Speaker Hasty is doing, because it's still 3 men in the back room, even though now one of them is women. But Mr. Hasty is the man in the back room most blocking action on climate.
So why do you feel that Speaker Hasty has not responded in this regard, considering that it's something that possibly would benefit the community?
Campaign donations, the wealth of the fossil fuel industry, political power. When you go up to Albany, the state capitol, maybe you get 3, 4, 5 people, like me running around trying to protect the environment. Many of us are, volunteers not getting paid for it. Some of the environmental groups do have staff, but basically on our side we have 10 or 15, staff who lobby. On the other side, you got 3, 4, 500 staff of the various polluters. They're getting paid, $200, $300 an hour to be lobbyists. They go basically all night long. They go to campaign fundraisers, dole out money. They're spending tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to buy legislators. And as you may know, a couple of years ago, they finally agreed to a system like New York City has to partially fund public campaign financing in New York State for state legislators and state elected officials. And this year, the State Assembly at the last moment basically gutted that law, even though it had not yet gone into effect, and really made it more of an incumbent protection program. All the media, all the good government groups were outraged by what the legislature did on public campaign finance, and it didn't work. I mean, the question is, are we going to try to build a world that protects the wealth and the profits of the 1%, or are we going to try to build a world that is concerned about the well-being and the common good of the 99% of us? And in Albany, and frankly in New York City Council, too often the 1% carries the day.
Yeah. I want to get your perspective a little bit. We talk about what's going on locally. You talk about New York City. We've got a lot of buses out there, school buses. I think about right around the time that we actually taped the show that you got buses that are going to and fro. And the fact is that many of them are still diesel buses. When we look at diesel buses now across New York City, you got to ask yourself the question, how much progress are we making in this area? I think about diesel buses that sometimes we could see close to, highways and really entrenched in low-income neighborhoods, and the potential damaging effect that it could project realistically on communities if there's not some sort of change dealt with.
Well, you're absolutely right. I will say more money has been allocated, so we are going to be switching over to electric school buses. We need to switch all buses over to electric schools. To electric vehicles. We need to improve mass transit. We need more faster buses, electric buses, in places which not being served by the subway system. It is shocking to me, while New York City has the MTA, the crown jewel of mass transit in the United States, the carbon footprint from transportation in New York City, rivals that of Los Angeles, with far less mass transit. We got to do a better job. People say probably maybe you should make the subways free to make it even easier for people, and certainly giving more subsidized cards to low-income people. But you're absolutely right, and these. Where you store the buses are often in low-income neighborhoods. They get the diesel emissions. They get, that's why we see a lot of asthma. And I will say, every time New York State has done a study of the negative health impacts in a lot of housing projects, they never say it's because of the local pollutant facilities next door. They never say it's because of the amount of trucks and buses that go by. They always say it's because low-income people, smoke too much, drink too much alcohol. It's always private decisions. So we really need to, get a health department, health officials that are much more willing to be realistic about what are the problems that low-income people are facing. And of course, so many of the pollutant facilities are based in low-income neighborhoods. It's one of the few things that was in the budget, besides getting the New York State Power Authority to begin to build renewables. They also agreed with, I guess, 8 or 9 years to begin to shut down what are called the peaker plants. These are usually the most pollutant facilities, and we only allow them to run at the moment when the demand is highest and the hottest days of the summer when the air conditioner is running. And that just pours an enormous amount of pollution into the low-income neighborhoods. So at least, they're going to be finally shut down, but, it's still going to take 8 or 9 years. There are solutions out there. And I should point out that, these solutions, besides increasing public health and actually lowering utility costs for people, also is the road path to full employment and good paying jobs. And in fact, the biggest labor issue right now with the transition to renewable energy is how do we train enough workers to fill all the jobs that we're going to create? And it's mind-boggling to me that when you have a solution, it's going to improve health, lower electric bills, lower utility costs, and create good, decent paying jobs. We face such a fight, and that's just because of the power of the utilities and the fossil fuel industry, and frankly, sometimes even the unions. Unions can be very good on some of these issues, but sometimes they can be more concerned about maintaining jobs for some of the workers in the gas pipeline issue. And that's why a lot of us talk about a just transition, that we got to make sure that the workers who are now dependent upon fossil fuels are in fact guaranteed that their standard of living is going to continue. And for instance, if they're laid off because we're shutting down a fossil fuel plant, that the government should guarantee their wages for at least 5 years and provide the training and make sure they're at the front of the line to get the new jobs being created.
Yeah, Mark,
and we got to fund environmental justice communities. Of course, I should want to say that.
Yeah. Well, I want to continue that conversation about environmental justice for just a few seconds because when we look at what's going on right now, you mentioned NYPIRG, New York Public Interest Research Group, and I don't want to date myself and let you know how long I've been sitting in this chair, but I go back when we were doing interviews with NYPIRG just like we're doing right now with you, talking a little bit about environmental justice back then, and to look at where we are today, still having this conversation really is kind of jarring, but at the same time, very necessary. So when we're talking about the work of what's going on out there, what are some of the things that maybe the general public right now should be keeping their eye on, should be raising their voice on right here in the New York City area if we're going to have some sort of environmental impact?
Well, one good thing is there's been a lot of support, especially on the Democrats, to invest new climate funds into environmental justice communities. And New York has an official goal of 35% of new climate funds going into such communities. The problem is they're not putting any money on the table, so 35% of zero, unfortunately, is still zero. And, there's a lot of loopholes that they allow into the law. So I think we need to make them deliver on their promises. One good bill, a group called We Act up in Harlem, helped pass a couple of years ago, is when you're giving permits now for new pollutant facilities, you shouldn't give them at all, but that when you do that, you need to now look at not only the pollution that's going to be created by that new facility, but also how much pollution is already there from existing facilities, and that may be a sufficient cause to deny the permit for the new facilities. And we have to make money available, particularly to low and moderate income people, to afford that transition. In my house, we put in air heat pumps. we had to shell out $10,000. We were able to afford that. 50% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford that $10,000 to put in, a new air heat pump system. So that has to be subsidized.
Yeah.
And we need to really start shutting down these, pollutant facilities. And they are located in low-income communities. And we talk about plastics. Plastics are being made in Kansas Alley, down there in Texas and Mississippi and Louisiana. We're always putting the pollutant facilities in the low-income neighborhoods because they don't have the political clout to say no.
Right. I got to get your thought before we wrap up about congestion pricing. A lot of New Yorkers are, saying, listen, this is a good thing. You have a lot of people saying this is not going to work whatsoever. But talk to us about the pros and cons you think of congestion pricing.
Well, we've certainly been a strong supporter of congestion pricing. We're disappointed it's taken so long to implement it. It does seem every few years we're told that the thing finally has a green light, and actually getting it to be implemented, of course, is a different thing. But hopefully it's going to be coming soon. And part of the problem is it's that the drivers coming in from Westchester, Long Island, New Jersey, who are more affluent, they don't want to pay the extra cost. But we need to get the cars out of our city. We need to make the mass transit system work more effectively. In the rest of the state, I always say we shouldn't say that we have a mass transit system that is comparable to a third world country, because why insult third world countries? They actually have much better mass transit systems than most of the United States does. We need to make mass transit not only affordable, but quick. In a lot of places it doesn't go where people live, and it doesn't go to where jobs are. So much of the mass transit, especially buses, takes people in from the suburbs, bring them to downtown, and then pulls them back to the suburb at night. But 80% of the people, that's not their work travel pattern. And we need to stop putting money into cars. We need to start putting much more money into mass transit. Congestion pricing, encouraging people not to use the cars as much is really important. And New York City is going to be a leader in that. It's disappointing it's taken so long to get it off the road, but hopefully in the next year or two we'll finally see it implemented.
Yeah, Mark Dunlea, we got to leave it there, but you've been doing a great job in terms of giving us some information to pay attention to, and a lot that's literally on the table, but we certainly are glad to have you, a steering committee member of 350 NYC. Before we go, Mark, please tell people how they can get in touch with you and your organization.
Well, they can all come and visit at a massive rally on September 17th when the the United Nations having a big march, and we're going to have a march for their climate meeting. But 350nyc.org, we get the New York City group. 350.org gets you to the national 350 group. And we're also on Facebook and all over social media.
Absolutely. Well, good to see you. Good to have you. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Daren.
All righty. We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
My character, Shazam, knows all about growing up in a family full of teenage superheroes. They're bold.
Where's everyone going?
To fight crime.
Okay.
Adventurous. Shazam! There's never a dull moment. And no matter what happens, they'll always have your back. All they need is a place to grow and be themselves. And the best part is, you don't have to be a superhero to adopt a teen. Learn more about adopting a teen from foster care. Visit adoptuskids.org. You can't imagine the reward.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, we love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
How do you know when you've made the right decision? It's the feeling you get in your gut, the one that tells you what's right or wrong. It's the one that says, sure, I can have a drink, or the feeling that says, okay, I've been drinking, now what? It's the voice inside you that says, I'm buzzed, better leave the car when it's time to go. Plan ahead, catch a sober ride. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here.
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection. Want to get out of here? To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out
Let's go!
and help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
And welcome back. The effects of global warming can be seen and felt across the planet. New York City confronted with the disconcerting future as it grapples with the alarming reality of sinking. Groundbreaking studies conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey has shed light on the profound impact of climate change and human activity on the city. Now, according to the study, if current trends continue, rising sea levels and melting glaciers could cause New York City to sink by up to 1.5 meters by the year 2100. Joining me now and sharing more is the department chairperson and professor of Civil Environmental Engineering at Manhattan College, Dr. Anirban Day, I should say. And Dr. Day, good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be in this program.
Thank you. And when we talk about climate change here in New York City, I mean, to look at this and say, okay, New York City to possibly sink by 1.5 meters, somebody's saying, that's not too bad. And then you have other people saying, what's going on? This is pretty major.
Yes, 1.5 meters is a lot of things to sink by. That's about 5 feet. And you cannot have a city work, do anything that we do now with us sinking by 5 feet, right? So that's not going to work. We have to figure out what is going on, what the scientists are actually saying, and what can we do to mitigate that problem. Now, one of the things we have to understand is that it is not really that the weight of the buildings are applied directly on the soft soil and the soil is sinking, like something that would happen if you place weight on a soft, mushy soil, because all the high rises that we see, the Empire State Building, the World Trade Center, the towers that are coming up around Central Park, they are all actually founded on bedrock. They are on solid rock. They are not going anywhere. So the rock is not sinking. It is the soft soil around it that is going down. So it is not as bad as it sounds in that the weight of the buildings is not going to be a problem, but overall there will be a lowering of the surface, and that is always happening. It is just that the climate change is making the sea level rise at the same time. So you have a building sink and the sea level rise that are going to create the problem.
Yeah. Well, we're dealing with climate change all across New York City. And I want to go back to the most recent events that we've had here, which is the wildfires. And I think that for many New Yorkers, it was a real grim reality to understand how much we're really dealing with quality of life issues when it comes to this. And when I thought about the wildfires, I thought about just living in certain parts of New York City that have to deal with bad air quality all day long. And it seems as though for, most of New Yorkers and New York State, it gave people an opportunity to really understand how some people live on a daily basis.
That is exactly right. I was asking, I put a picture on Facebook from my evening sunset in my town where I live just outside New York City. And my friends from California said, that looks like our place. I mean, that's what we went through when we had the wildfires. It is really bizarre that, we are living hundreds of miles away in a different country from where the fires are, and yet we are all affected. And this tells you that, we are not immune to climate change, even if your own city, your own village, your district tries to be progressive, tries to put certain regulations in place and control, and make sacrifices to save the environment, you are not immune to things going wrong somewhere else and totally affecting our lives.
Yeah, we're talking about climate change, and let me stay with the local wildfires for a moment. We know that they've come, they've gone, but reality is there is a potential long-term impact for some people who've been experienced this.
Yes, it is having, the doctors are telling us that it does have some serious health issues. Those who have respiratory problems, those who have asthma, small children, older people, they have. I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm hearing on the media and reading, there are long-term health effects for these people. For all of us, the way it was a couple of weeks back, it affected all of us. We were having itchy eyes, we were coughing more than we do, and that's not good, and we don't want it to be this way in the long term.
Yeah, I want to go back to our initial conversation. We were talking a little about the sinking of New York City, the New York City sinking possibly by meters if all continues the way that it's going right now. And when I think about what's going on, there's a lot of construction that's going on here in New York. And when you look at what's happening here in New York City, a lot of buildings are going up, a lot of deep digging is going down. What's that weighing like? You know, because we hear about a new New York, but yet and still a new New York could have some real potential challenges given the fact that we're seeing all this new construction happening.
So when we build, that's a very good question. So when we build something, we need good foundations. You need to transfer the load from the building, from the people, all the furniture, everything that is in the building, the structure itself, the concrete, the steel. They have to transfer the load somewhere. And usually the bedrock is our go-to place, because once you put the load on the rock, it goes straight into the ground and it is not going to be affected by anything else. So whenever possible, our goal is to put the load on the rock. And it is very interesting that if you look at the Manhattan skyline from New Jersey, like standing in Hoboken, you look east, you're going to see the New York skyline. You see the skyscrapers near the Central Park up to about 34th Street on the south end, Empire State Building. And on the very south tip, you are going to see the World Trade Center and the buildings around the financial district. In between, there is no high rise. Why is that so? Because the bedrock is very deep in that area, and it was not possible to put high-rise buildings and put them on the soft soil. So the skyline of New York, the U-shaped skyline, which dips in the in the lower town just north of the financial district, tells you what the much deeper subsurface is like, where there are rocks and where there isn't.
Yeah. Do you have a fear, given the fact that there's so much construction going on?
You know, that you're asking a difficult question for me to answer, because I am very deeply involved with civil and construction engineering. We teach students who go out and work. The people that are doing the work are my colleagues. So I have no fear for what is going on, because I know that there are a lot of checks and balances in place. Now, we may ask that even in spite of those checks and balances, disasters do happen. We know what happened in Philadelphia a couple of weeks back with that highway bridge, and we know much bigger serious problems in, say, during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and things like that. Yes, problems can happen, but there are always engineering solutions to those that we have to do it correctly. The most important thing is to do the corrections and understand the scope of nature. We should not be arrogant. We should not think that we know the solutions and nothing can happen. We have to understand what nature can do and always have mitigations or steps that will help us alleviate those problems.
Yeah. Talking with some people just this past week, and we were talking about how New Yorkers are still trying to overcome the effects of Hurricane Sandy. And even though Sandy has come and gone, a lot of people are still really recovering from the effects of Hurricane Sandy. Some still years projected out before even getting back to a place of once they once were. And that was several years ago. But it brings to mind the question about what we're dealing with when it comes to these rising flood rates, because we're seeing coastal flooding at an all-time high. And I think that for many New Yorkers, it's a question as to, is this something that we can possibly anticipate more of in the near future?
I think that last part, you are absolutely right. We have to anticipate these more in the future, because with climate change, we are seeing extremes of weather, and all across the world, we are seeing higher water levels, higher or more intense rainfall events that we didn't see before, and snowfall events or large periods of time with no rainfall. So both extremes are happening, and we have to be prepared for them. It is very unfortunate what happened in Sandy and how people are affected. And those are human problems that we have to make sure we have the proper systems in place to address those. It is not, I mean, we are the largest, or we are the richest nation in the world. There is absolutely no reason why we cannot help people who are affected by these, when the simple solutions are to get them housing, get them proper places in safe environments where they will not be affected. Look, I mean, in the Northeast, we are blessed in terms of weather so far. We don't have the extreme tornadoes that we are hearing our friends in the South are experiencing. We don't have earthquakes. The wildfires are really far away, but still affecting us. We have, generally speaking, good climate in the Northeast that has helped us. And the rising sea levels are a challenge, but it is not completely unheard of in other parts. I mean, New Orleans has always lived below sea level, and they have lived with seawalls and flood walls and things like that. So most of the time they work. They didn't work during Katrina. Netherlands is a European country that has notoriously high water level all around the countryside, and they have managed more or less, generally speaking, in a good way. England, many parts of the United Kingdom have low-lying areas, and they have been able to do that. In the United States, we have managed it so far, and I'm confident that we can do that as long as we all work together and find the solutions and all work towards making it work.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do around here, and I think about, you know, what is happening in our environment right now. We see that there's a lot of environmental challenges. Our previous guest talked about environmental justice and his push to make sure that environmental justice is really occurring, because there's so many people who are being who are being affected by it. I guess the question is, what do we do now as New Yorkers, as a community? What do we do in terms of trying to mitigate some of these challenges? Because they're coming fast and furious, but we're going to need to put our collective boots together to try to stop, literally, and pardon the pun, the tide from rising.
Absolutely. You got that absolutely right. And that is correct. Now, the thing is, the first thing we do when the problem is, we are facing a problem, is recognize that there is a problem. Because, you know, I mean, not so much in New York, but in other parts of the country, there is still a denial that these things are real and they are actual challenge. Some people think these are just freaks of nature and they have always been periods of, no, that's not what is happening. This is real. There is a continuous trend towards higher water level, higher sea levels, and higher temperatures and things like that. So we have to understand that. And then we have to understand how this affects us. Your point about environmental justice is absolutely right. It affects certain areas more than others. And obviously those have been, so to say, undesirable areas where real estate has been cheaper, and therefore communities that cannot afford more expensive areas have congregated, and it is the society's imperative to help them and make sure that those areas are protected just as much as everywhere else. We need to have a holistic societal approach to this, understand where the challenges are, and then try to rectify. People have to also understand that these natural trends have a certain way of playing it out, and we cannot keep fighting them. So rather than go back and build in an area which has seen floods repeatedly, we have to find ways of retreating and going up to higher lands, higher grounds, and make it. And sometimes there are social or economic issues that come into play. In other words, is it more important to save somebody's beachfront vacation home or save a community from inundation. And those calls are really political, social in nature. And as a society, we have to attack them and do what is right by the values of our society.
Yeah, that's a hard call there, because you got somebody that says, "Listen, I need my house, and I want my house," and then you have the community says, "Well, we need your house," and that can become. And we've seen this. That has been the bone of contention in so many communities as to stopping progress from happening from communities who really want to see some effect and some change being done. For you right now, as you do your work, what are some things that you would say that we, the public, should be paying attention to right about now?
Well, the big theme in all of this is infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I just don't mean bridges and tunnels and railroad bridges and things like that. But what we are talking about is infrastructure that supports our life. It affects the quality of life. And if we don't do something about this, it is going to affect. And I was listening to the previous guest, and he said something in terms of don't say our public transit is like the third world because you'll be insulting them. There is no reason why the richest nation on earth should not be able to protect its people from whether it's nature, whether it's rising population, whatever it is, we have to provide quality of life. And for that, we have to make decisions as a society. And that's what we try to tell students when we have young minds in our hands, that you need to know how we affect what happens in society. And as a society, we make decisions of where to put our resources and how to make the infrastructure work for you. And by infrastructure, I mean the wastewater treatment systems. When a treatment plant floods, you have sewage, raw sewage on the streets like we had after Sandy. There's no reason why that would be happening in New York. Why we cannot have clean drinking water free of lead and anything else for our children. These are essentials in life, and we have to make sure that they are available for everybody, not just a few who live in certain areas or who are privileged to afford certain things.
Yeah, I always contend that there's a problem when we can't get clean drinking water and you got lead in water, when sometimes it just costs a little bit more to change the pipes, but now it becomes such a challenge. I've got some great friends in Flint, Michigan who can attest to that even though they've changed, they got clean water, they don't have clean pipes. And so it always becomes this ever-growing challenge of how can we make things better and what can we do in order to make things, in order to make things better. But I think about what we can do. What can we do to prevent things from happening? We talked about Superstorm Sandy and the effect that it had here in New York City, and it continues to have lingering effects for some. What can we do to avoid having such a catastrophe as Sandy, if that were to come back this way again? How can we be better prepared?
We need to protect ourselves. So the city itself has to be protected. And there were massive investments done to build flood walls and different types of systems that would hopefully be able to block the tide. I mean, Sandy happened because there were huge storm surges. There was not that much rainfall, but the storm surge from the river, from the ocean and from the rivers were extremely high. So we have to block those. That would be a way to protect our city. We have to make sure there are certain measures that were already taken. For example, very quickly, hospitals realized that you do not put your backup power system in your basement because they are going to get flooded and you're going to lose power and lose your generators. So already there is a move. There has been rules that now the mechanical rooms are now on upper floors of buildings and things like that. We have to prepare our population for any kind of disaster like this, how we can mitigate that disaster, have people be able to survive on short term without power or without water supply. You have backup water, etc., which is emergency preparedness. And there has to be a consciousness in the society that these are realities of life, and we have to all make sacrifices to be prepared for them. If you look at societies like Japan or Taiwan, which are unfortunately very prone to earthquake, the whole nation is geared towards preparedness. You talk to them, they do drills. They're all ready that a disaster may come, and here is how we will protect each other and protect our neighbors. We need to have that mindset, not because we don't have to live in constant threat, but we have to understand that these are natural forces that do happen every once in a while, and there should be no excuse if the next Sandy comes, unless it is, God forbid, much bigger than the previous one. There is no reason we should not be able to protect ourselves from something that comes, which has happened before. We should be ready for that kind of event.
I've heard conversations with, I've had conversations with people, even from the UK, who say, listen, when it comes to the United States, your level of preparedness isn't quite up to snuff. Your level of dealing with things aren't quite up to snuff. And, I got my American pride on my shoulder. I'm saying, no, you don't understand. And they're like, no, you don't understand that even though you tout to be the major superpower, that there's some weaknesses that you have and some chinks in the armor here.
You are absolutely right. I think we have been very fortunate as a nation, as a society, to be protected, to be sheltered. As I said, in the Northeast, we are blessed with wonderful climate, good natural things that favor us in terms of protecting us, and never have to worry about things that our friends on the West Coast or other parts of the country, this country, are suffering from, and the rest of the world. But that does not give us a reason to be complacent, to be kind of lazy, or just to relax ourselves. We have to be careful. And when it comes, we have to understand that there are other nations or other parts of this country which face these challenges. And we may need to make certain sacrifices politically as well as individually, in other words, as a society as well as individually when it comes to it, so that we are protected. First thing is protect yourself, protect your family, protect the young ones in your family, protect your neighbors, and then think of the luxury things that you can do. Yeah, we will go on a vacation, but let's first make sure our house is in order so it doesn't get flooded. I hear these stories of basements flooding every year, and sometimes you wonder, is there some priority that maybe the basement is more important to me than investing money somewhere else? And these are calls we have to make individually, but also as a society.
Yeah, so as we look towards the future, what things should we be paying attention to keep our minds focused?
Listen to the scientists. And this we heard, it was a mantra for the last 2 or 3 years when the pandemic was there. Now we are talking about climate change in all of these respects. Listen to the scientists, listen to the changes in the climate that are coming, that are long term, and understand what the prioritize in your own mind. What is your priority? Is it your priority to have certain short-term fun stuff, or is it important to have the long-term vision and save and invest in areas where it will protect us as a society? We have to basically, I have young college-age kids. It is the same thing we tell our teenagers or college kids of how to prioritize their important things and put resources where they'll be pay off in the long term. As a society, we have to do the same thing.
Yeah. Doctor, I think about when Al Gore was running for president of the United States, he had a lot of conversation about climate change. It almost was like back then that he seemed like not even the boy that cried wolf. He was the guy that just couldn't get that much respect because it wasn't that much of a quote-unquote sexy issue. But now when we look at what's going on across the world, people have to say, and when you look right here in the United States, you look right, you can look at New York as a prime case and example, you have to say this is something that we can't just turn our noses up and turn our eyes away from.
Absolutely not. Yes, you are right. Al Gore was right at that time. Most people didn't appreciate it, and even at that time, probably even the scientific community was split to some extent, and there were those who were saying, no, it's might be due to something else, and people who had political agenda took advantage of that, saying, look, scientists are divided, it's not really a foregone conclusion, it might be something different, but all of the evidence he showed are turning out to be right, and now we have ample proof of every year having large catastrophic events every year or every so often around the world that are visiting us that have never happened before. The water levels are rising. We have evidence of that. It unfortunately takes certain amount of time before it sinks in. But yes, we need to keep our eyes open and protect ourselves.
Yeah. So for people who want to get in touch with you and follow some of the work that you do, tell us how they can be connected.
Well, Manhattan.edu. I work for Manhattan College right here in the Bronx. We have been here for 150 years in the Bronx now, and longer in New York area. So go to Manhattan.edu and you can look us all up. And there are wonderful things that are happening between different departments at Manhattan College. Most of our students come from the tri-state area. Most come from New York City and the boroughs of New York City. We love those kids, and they all go back and work. Most of them work in the New York area. We are the largest civil engineering program in New York City, and we are very proud for that heritage. Our president used to say, Manhattan is the college that built New York, and we love it.
Well, for those people who may not be so familiar, right there, Manhattan College of Riverdale, and they've done an excellent job in several of their programs. But I want to talk to you about what we're talking about here, which is this and climate change. When you talk to your students about that, are they really connecting the dots, or are well, they're students, but I would wonder how many of them are really embracing this to say, hey, this is real, as opposed to some of us who've got some years on us who are saying, you know what, maybe.
It's very interesting you're saying that. I think the students are more receptive to this because they are hearing it. And as I said, most of them come from the tri-state area, from New York City, as well as from elsewhere. But they have all seen some of this in their own lives. Sandy is not that long back. These students were little kids then, but they heard about Sandy. They probably experienced it themselves, but heard about it from their parents, grandparents, neighbors, older siblings, etc. They see these climate change things happening. And we have a solid program in which we show them about climate change from different angles: environmental engineering, environmental science, chemistry, physics, biology. You understand why these things are happening. It is not just a voodoo thing that just happens. There are certain causative reasons why it is coming, and what are the ways in which we can solve it, putting our engineering, our sociological heads together, bring in economics, bring in politics, and come to a solution that helps our society.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Daren, I want to thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us today. Of course, great work that's going on. He is the department chairperson and professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Manhattan College, and giving us all that we need to know with regards to climate change. And hopefully, Dr. Daren, we'll get a chance to bring you back. We'll assess how things are going, and if we find ourselves in some challenges, hopefully we can bring you back and hear your voice, and you can give us a credible message.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to coming back again and talking. Keep up the good work.
Hey, thank you so much. All righty. Well, I want to let you know we come to the end of our show today, and I hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. If you asked the question about how does environmental justice play out in social justice, well, it's a social thing that we really have to pay attention to, because many times when you talk about environmental justice, it is connected into marginalized communities, and sometimes communities of color, the low, the poor, the disenfranchised. These are people who usually fall right in the framework of environmental injustice. And so you've got many who are advocating, and it's like our guests are today, to make sure that climate change is taken a look at, and also environmental justice. Thank you for joining us. Now, if you want to rewatch this week's edition, please catch the Recablecast right here on BronxNet TV or BronxNet.org. If you want to join in on the conversation and present your point of view, you can do just that. Our social media pages are BronxNet TV. We invite you to come back next week. Join us. We'll continue to elevate the discussion, bring further awareness across the globe. I'm Daren Jaime, your host, saying take care, God bless, and we'll catch you on the next one of the Social Justice, and we'll see you soon.